Okay. Okay. Well, welcome back, folks. We are going to start a whole new series of presentations today, and this one is just going to be for fun. Um, I'm a historian and I like history, but sometimes you just need to do something for fun, and that's what we're going to be doing for the next, actually, several months. This is going to be kind of a long one. So, what we're going to be doing is talking about the history of the music of the 1950s and the 1960s. And I can't think of a better way to get this started than just a little bit of music. So here is Bob Seger and the Silver Bullet Band. Whoop, and I just went past it. Well, well, guess what? That didn't work. Okay. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to be talking about music of the 50s and 60s. And again, this is basically a course that's the presentations that's just for fun. Um, Here's how it's going to work. We're going to spend about 2 or 3 weeks talking about the roots of the music. How did we get to the music of the 50s and 60s? Uh, I'm a historian, and I think it's really important to know where you've been, so you'll know exactly where you're at. And so for that reason, this is how we're going to do it this. And then from that point on, we're just going to go year by year from 1954 up through 1970. I kind of stopped there because a few reasons. Number one, I kind of think music of the 50s and 60s kind of begins and ends with Elvis. And although Elvis lived on a few more years after 1970, you can kind of say that was the end of his big era. So I thought a good way to get this started would be talking about a little bit of trivia. Let's have a trivia question. I'm just curious if anybody out there can answer this. What American composer is often called the father of American music? And I'll just go do a little Jeopardy music here or something, and you can kind of answer. And of course, the answer is, if you didn't know, it is Stephen Foster, born in 1826 in Pennsylvania, wrote a lot of really famous songs. Oh, Susanna, Camptown Races, Old Folks at Home, better known as Swanee River, Beautiful Dreamer. We still sing these songs. I know when I was in elementary school that, in music class, we sung these songs constantly. They're still being recorded today. A little bit about him. Most of his songs are written about the South, but Stephen Foster was only in the South one time in his whole life. And he actually didn't live very long. He only lived to be the age of 37. And he suffered some injuries and died, in 1864, towards the end of the Civil War. Nobody knows exactly what happened. It could have been an accident. It could have been self-inflicted. There's a lot of debate about exactly how he died. All we know is that he left a note in his pocket which stated, "Dear friends and gentle hearts." And of course, that became a song a little bit later, written by a man by the name of Bob Hilliard. Um, and so that's a little bit about Stephen Foster. We'll hear a little bit more about him. So, why in the world do we want to do this? Well, I told you, it's just basically for fun, folks. We're not here for any big historical lessons. When I taught the American West to you, I was trying to show you how the Americans became Americans. When we talked about ancient history in the Bible, I was trying to set the historical context of the Bible. When we talked just recently about the Ozarks history, I was trying to dispel some of the stereotypical images that we have of the Ozarks. So there are lessons to be learned here, but that's not really why I'm doing it. Remember, the music of the 50s and 60s is the music of the baby boomers. That's the group of Americans that, are still kind of ruling the country today. They started in the 1970s and they've pretty much been in charge. They've been the dominant social, economic, political ruling class. And since music kind of reflects culture and society, I think it's important that we maybe look at it because it'll give us some insight into the economic issues of the 50s and 60s, the political and societal issues, particularly when it comes to race, economic equity, mobility of class structure. Of course, fashion trends and entertainment was all part of it. And I guess I kind of feel that I'm pretty much can do this because I am a baby boomer. I was born in 1947. I'm kind of a youngin compared to some of you out there, I think. And I've got to tell you, I am maybe the most unmusical person you will ever meet in your life. When I try to sing Dogs Run for Cover, the only instrument I can play is the radio when I turn the knob on. And I could come closer to reading Egyptian hieroglyphics than I could a sheet of music. I have absolutely zero musical talent, but I love music. And I love all types of music. I love country music. I love folk music. I love gospel music. I love rhythm and blues. But I'm kind of particularly feel kind of partial toward that old time rock and roll of the 50s and 60s. I got to tell you, when I'm driving down the street and one of those old tunes come on, I just can't help but have a smile come to my face. It's just kind of it's the soundtrack of our youth. That's what I call it. And thought you'd be interested. Here's some baby boomers. That's a guy there that lived in Springfield and a good friend of his. And that little squirt right there is me. And you can tell I'm basically looking over at these two guys, kind of, idolize them. I would have been probably about 10 or 11 years old at this age. So this would have been probably 56, 57, somewhere in that area there when this photograph was taken. So can you imagine your folks dancing to rock and roll? I asked when I did this at the township last week, I asked that. And there's two or three of them raised their hands. But I want you to think about this, folks. Music is timeless. Yes, it changes in a lot of ways, but it's really kind of timeless. So I thought this would be kind of fun. Let's listen to Elton John's Crocodile Rock, but the dancers are not who you think they're going to be.
Who that is, Fred. So much fun, holding hands and skimming stones. Had no gold seven and a place of my own, but the biggest kick I ever got was gonna play crocodile rock. All the other kids are rocking around the park. We were hopping, bobbing to the crocodile rock. Well, you ran by in a rocked out style. Soon you left us for a guy. On the right machine, dreaming of the Chevy and the old blue jeans, but I never killed the things we got. Up to the crocodile, there we went back. You know, the land.
Tony, your sound isn't coming through. Just wanted to let you know.
Sure is. I guess I can.
Well, I understand we have a sound problem here. Rochelle, can you hear me at all?
You speaking, but the sound of the video isn't coming through at all.
Wonder why. Never had that problem before. That's not
It's
good.
not coming through for us either.
Well, let's see if I can figure out what's going on here, okay? Let me do something here.
Yeah, I don't know if you'll have to share your computer sound or.
Okay, let's see if this works now.
It's a shame because that really looked good.
Let's see if that works. Can you hear that?
No.
Oh boy. Well, I'm gonna have to get this figured out, that's for sure. It ought to be going through. Volume settings here. Is that working?
No, I'm sorry.
Still not working?
No.
Oh boy. This was my biggest nightmare. I was afraid this was going to happen. Well, boy.
I remember when rock was young. Me and Susie had so much fun, holding hands and skimming stones. Had an old gold Chevy and a place of my own, but the biggest kick I ever got was doing a thing called the crocodile rock.
Okay, well, okay, now if I can get this to go to the next slide. We'll hear that again. There, oh, there we go. Okay, so now I'm trying to figure out why I can't get my screen shares thing here up. Oh, technical problems are wonderful. So let's kind of look back. We're gonna trace the history of popular music back from when it started up to the 50s and 60s. That's what we're going to be doing. Well, now probably part of next week too. Prior to the 1800s or so, there were really only kind of two kind of musics in America. There was art music, what we now call classical music, and there was folk songs, songs that the people brought with them from the old country, the Irish ballads, the English ballads, the Italian ballads, whatever. That all changed in the 1830s when a man by the name of Stephen Foster began to write what he called parlor music. He felt like there ought to be American songs, and he wrote his songs for the common person. He didn't expect to have orchestras, and he didn't expect that these people would be trained musicians. He wrote songs that could be sung in a parlor by one or two people, maybe accompanied by a banjo or a guitar or a piano or whatever. And he wrote hundreds of songs, songs that we still sing today. Oh, Susanna, Camptown Races, Swanee River, My Old Kentucky Home, Beautiful Dreamer. They're still being sung, folks. They're still being recorded. And, that's how popular music got started. And I just thought it was kind of curious. I looked up on the internet to see if anybody was still singing these. And it's amazing. I found a man by the name of James Taylor. Some of you probably know him, Sweet Baby James. Had a Grammy nominated album put out in 1970. And it had some of his best songs on there. But right in the middle of the soundtracks was Oh, Susanna. And it kind of shocked me. I never would have thought that James Taylor would have been recording Oh, Susanna. But sure enough, he did. So let's listen to James Taylor sing that.
Well, I come from Alabama with my banjo on my knee, and I'm bound for Louisiana, my own true love for to see. It did rain all night the day I left, the weather was bone dry. The sun was so hot I froze myself. Suzanne, don't you go on and cry. I said, oh, Susanna, now don't you cry for me, as I come from Alabama with this banjo on my knee. Well, I had myself a dream the other night when everything was still. I dreamed that I saw my girl Suzanne. She was coming around the hill. Now the buckwheat cake was in her mouth, the tear was in her eye. I said that I come from Dixieland. Suzanne, don't you break down and cry. I said, oh, Susanna, now don't you cry for me, 'cause I come from Alabama with my banjo on my knee.
Okay, the next step in the development of popular music in America was the minstrel show. Now that started in actually antebellum South. They were skits, they were comic skits, variety acts, dancing, musical performances, and they were done by white people depicting black people wearing blackface makeup. These shows were extremely racist, characterized black people as dim-witted, lazy, buffoonish, happy-go-lucky. And, you know, we would like to think that we're past that in our life, but unfortunately, we still have some of those depictions going on in the media today. And I have to tell you, you know, this is kind of a trigger warning. You know, that's what they call these things anymore. You know, you're going to see some clips here in the next few slides that may be culturally insensitive. But I'm a historian that believes that you have to look at your history if you're going to learn from the mistakes of it. And so I don't want anyone to be offended or anything, but I think that we need to talk about this. This is minstrel shows. This, I don't know where that came from. This happens to be a news program that talks about minstrel shows for about 3 minutes. I thought it'd be interesting.
The controversy over Virginia Governor Ralph Northam and blackface hasn't yet cost Northam his job. But it apparently means the country needs to have a conversation, again, about the toxic strain in American cultural history known as minstrelsy. So it's time for a little education, just in case there are Americans out there who may be too afraid to ask their best black friend why it's so offensive.
Minstrelsy is a performance tradition that started in the mid-1800s. And what it was whites dressing up, caricaturing African Americans, mimicking their dance, their language, their music, providing comic relief for their audiences. Minstrelsy operates in two ways. In one way, it separates whiteness as something very distinct for blackness and frames blackness as something of the other and lesser than white cultural habits, ways of speech, song, and dance. It objectifies African Americans and distances them from their humanity. It made them seem foolish, simple of mind, not intelligent, cheap, an image and a stereotype that people use as a lens to judge African Americans from here on out. It moved on to vaudeville, musical comedy, musical theater, and also into television, radio, and films. You'll find the remnants of minstrelsy in a lot of forms of popular culture. Think about some of your favorite film comedies or television shows, when white actors mimic African American speech patterns or breaking into a moonwalk. In some ways, they are taking on that same persona that the blackface entertainers did on the minstrel stage. I think blackface is a really complicated issue. I find it painful to see it in action. It's a reminder of the devaluation of who African Americans have been in this country. And so when we wrestle with that history and really start to understand it, I believe that's the first step to really ridding ourselves of these images.
Okay, so where did we go after minstrel shows? Well, we went to vaudeville. Vaudeville came into being towards the end of the 19th century, and it kind of absorbed the minstrel shows. By the way, vaudeville is a French term for voice of the city, and that's actually where it started, was in France. It was usually comprised of musicians, singers, dancers, comedians, animal acts, magicians, strongmen, acrobats. Kind of an important step was the fact that you begin to see women involved in vaudeville. Up to this point in time, women were not involved at all in entertainment shows like minstrel shows or anything like that. They just did not have a place, but suddenly you begin to see women more involved. I thought I'd show you a typical vaudeville act. And again, it's pretty stereotypical. It's culturally insensitive, but I think it's important for us to see it because this vaudeville act started in 1932 in London Palladium, and actually went for 30 years. Every night, these two comedians put it on. It was called the Sand Dance by a couple guys by the name of Wilson and Keppel. By the way, if you're a fan of the old time Saturday Night Live back in the early 70s when it first started, you might remember Steve Martin did a routine about King Tut. He was, was very well received, very popular. He said he actually got his idea for doing that from this Wilson and Keppel sand dance routine that he saw as a young kid in a vaudeville show. So let's look at the Sand Dance by Wilson and Keppel. Okay, so what happened next? Well, vaudeville went on for some time, but there began to be more of a sophistication about American music. About this time, New York developed what we now know as Broadway, where they began to develop the big theaters and musical productions going on. And the Broadway show tunes became very popular around the turn of the century. Most of them were written out of a place called Tin Pan Alley, written by people that we've all heard the names: George Gershwin, Irving Berlin, particularly George Cohan, who's generally called the father of the American musical. And by the way, Tin Pan Alley is a slang term for decrepit piano. They said that there was such a cacophony of sound emanating out of this block of buildings in downtown Broadway that it just sounded like a bunch of people banging pans together. Like I said, George Cohan was probably by far and away the most famous of these. He's kind of the father of the American musical. And his life was depicted in a movie in the 1940s called Yankee Doodle Dandy, starring James Cagney. And this is one of the tunes that he wrote, which is, we've heard it forever. We still play it. It's a great song. Okay, so now the only problem with those tunes, they required big productions, and most people, unless you went to the big urban centers, you weren't going to be able to see that. So again, you had music that kind of branched off, kind of coming out of the vaudeville area, and particularly as a reaction to World War One, you begin to have ragtime develop. Ragtime was only around for a very short number of years because I've been told by people that are that can play ragtime that it's a pretty difficult musical genre to play, and as a result, it really didn't last very long. I know of one particular person in the Springfield area that's a well-noted ragtime player, but other than that, it's just not played generally anymore. By the way, the man that's generally considered to be father of ragtime was Scott Joplin, who has his roots in Missouri, lived in Sedalia and St. Louis for a long time. Ragtime was often played as background music for silent movies. We didn't see talkies begin until the late 1920s, 1929, actually, I believe. And, up to that point in time, they would always have someone playing a piano, and ragtime kind of fit that. And so you saw a lot of ragtime music being played as background music for silent movies. For instance, here's a classic example. This is Charlie Chaplin doing one of his routines in Modern Times. And again, it's using ragtime as the background. Okay, well, it looks like I'm about out of time, so I guess I'm going to need to stop for today. Sorry about the sound situation. I hope we got that rectified. Rochelle, did it seem to work okay after we got that worked?
Yeah, it worked great. You just might have to, every time you share your screen from now on, you'll probably have to go and check that box.
Got it. That's a step that I've never had to do before. I don't know what's happened there. Well, next week, what we're going to do is we're going to continue on looking at how popular music evolved until the 1950s. We're going to particularly look at jazz, blues, swing music, and finally rhythm and blues before we get into the 50s and the crooner period. So we've got about 5 more to look at before we actually get into the 50s and 60s music. So I hope you've enjoyed it. I hope this is what you were looking forward to. It's going to be a lot of fun. We're going to listen to a lot of music, and maybe it'll get our blood pumping.